let's go ahead and take a look at the screenplay that, like I said, I've been wanting to talk about for a while. We've just had way too much topical stuff come up in the news that fits in with the show, so we wanted to hit that first. But before we do, let me give you a little background. So if you're trying to picture this along in your head, as you should, you get the right idea. So the movie was set to be directed, of course, by James Cameron with the cast that follows. Leonardo DiCaprio was played Peter Parker, Robin Lively as MJ, Maggie Smith as Aunt May, Arlie Emery as J. Jonah Jameson, Lance Henriksen as Carlton Strand / Electro, Michael Biehn as Sandman, and a cameo of Arnold Schwarzenegger as Otto Octavius. Now the plot, and I will try to keep this as brief as I can, but I do want you guys to get the general details of what this movie was going to be, because I really, really liked it. The plot is very similar to the original Tobey Maguire movie that ended up being made, with some very, very obvious differences. First off, the Osborns, not there. There's no Green Goblin, no Harry Osborn. The beginning of the movie, though, is still very similar. Peter's at school and gets paired with the girl of his dreams for a project, and of course, this ends up being Mary Jane Watson. MJ is with the popular girls, and Peter's getting bumped around by Flash Thompson. So one day, Pete goes on to this billion-dollar research facility that's not named Oscorp, gets bit by a radioactive spider, feels weird, goes home, tries to sleep it off, has crazy nightmares, and wakes up hanging from a stoplight at like 4 a.m. in his underwear, which I think is a position that we've all been in before.
In there.
Yep. He gets home, tries to sleep it off again before school. This time, when he wakes up, we get the typical, oh shit, I'm Spider-Man scene. He's bigger, faster, stronger, and can see. He starts accidentally webbing up everything in the room, which I think is a very sexual innuendo. And the scene actually reads very similar to the bathroom scene in X-Men Origins Wolverine. We get almost the same testing out my Spider-Man powers montage that we saw with Tobey Maguire and Andrew Garfield movies. If nothing else, maybe a little bit goofier. We, of course, get a scene where he's using Spider-Man powers to spy on Mary Jane as she undresses to go to sleep, which, of course, is creepy, but stereotyping a teenage boy, so I get it. Cut back to the training montage, and this is where we see the symbolism of darkness start to play in. I actually really like that about this screenplay, because we really do see the theme of darkness explored in a much more liberal sense than we did with the movies that actually did get made with Tobey Maguire and Andrew Garfield and Tom Holland. And you'll see what I mean by that as we look further. We also start to see this underlying anger in Peter, the built-up frustration and angst that he has as Peter Parker, the kid that nobody likes and gets bullied and is a lower middle-class family and lives with his aunt and uncle and has no parents. It reads, we explore the idea that the lure of darkness replaces the fear of the dark, that the dark becomes a comforting, nurturing place for Peter rather than a place of dread and uncertainty. He feels at home in the dark, secure there. It is the place he seeks for solace, for peace. Everything is backwards for him. Night becomes day. Heights, previously terrifying, now attract him. The air becomes water. He swims weightlessly where other mortals would plummet and break. He is at home in places others fear, and it stirs something dark inside him, a predatory urge. What I think is so interesting is that we always see the balance of power shift once Peter gets his powers. We'll always see the realization in Peter Parker that, oh shit, I can kick these other guys' asses if I wanted to, but he knows he can't. And that idea is actually one of the reasons that I love Superman as a character so much, but that's a different video for a different day. In this adaptation of the character, you actually see Peter tempted to the dark side more than I think we ever actually do. This Peter decides he's going to start using these powers to make money. And so we see him start parkouring his way up and down sidewalks in a makeshift spider suit. He gets popular, the press starts to notice, and that's when we meet our big bad in the most evil mobster moment like ever. Cut to an opulent mansion in Manhattan, marble floors, priceless art on the walls, camera tracking through the luxurious darkness to a vast living room with a fire burning in an enormous fireplace. One wall of the room is covered with TV screens, a figure watching it from a high back chair, watching the amazing Spider-Man on the variety show. A hand appears from the chair back with a minute gesture and no remote. The hand commands the TV screens. They all switch the channel on which Spider-Man is performing. 20 images of Spider-Man on cable. As the audience claps and the host makes some backhanded compliment, a joke at Spider-Man's expense. Peter, eager to please, doesn't get it. He does another trick. The band strikes up and they go commercial. We reveal the figure in the chair. This is Carlton Strand. He's in his early 40s and exudes power from every pore. He is wearing a very expensive custom-tailored suit. His hair is slicked back, very GQ. His nails are manicured. His watch is platinum. He is the image of vast wealth not inherited. Cut to a Spider-Man voiceover. Carlton Strand. You'd think Trump is big. Ha, ha, ha. This guy was bigger. There he was, sitting like a big fat spider at the center of his web of power and megabucks. Like I said, very, very 90s typical mobster, and I actually really enjoyed it. I thought it was really funny. So, the man introduced is obviously Electro, and that's also where we meet Sandman, his henchman, who goes by Boyd in this movie instead of Flint Marko, again, for reasons. And we learn Electro's backstory. That very typical 90s villain, he's essentially a low-level henchman who gets caught in an electrical experiment storm, basically being in the wrong place at the wrong time, gets powers, and becomes Electro. They also go on to say how Strand can never touch anybody or he'll accidentally kill them, which gives us this idea that Strand can never be happy and has to find happiness and money and being an evil dick. And he also, the touching people and kill them, I noticed, was very similar to Rogue in the X-Men movies. Peter ends up going on a talk show, and when he leaves, he gets beat up by Sandman. It's a realization that he's not the only one with powers anymore. Cut back to Peter, who's leaving school to go home when he sees Flash hit Mary Jane, which once again, 90s. Then as Flash is leaving gymnastics practice, which is super masculine, Peter beats the shit out of him in a black fishnet mask, equally masculine. Then threatens him to stay away from MJ. Peter loves the fact that he just beat the piss out of the bully, and we're starting to see this anti-hero build up inside of Spider-Man. He starts doing Spider-Man-y things, breaking up fights between a man and a woman, and the lady goes, "Stop hitting my husband." Then we get the Uncle Ben, great power, great responsibility scene. Never actually says that, though. And Peter's like, yeah, okay, cool, old guy. We get to see him where Peter's leaving his agent's office. The guy runs in to rob the place. He didn't stop it. The guy leaves and kills Uncle Ben. And then Peter has the epiphany, oh, shit, I could have done something to stop this. Tracks the guy down and, of course, realizes it was the same dude. And actually webs him up, unlike killing him accidentally like they did in the original Spider-Man movie, and I'm 99% sure they do in the comic books, which actually surprised me because I really did think that Peter was going to kill him while reading this. He webs the guy up and drops him off at the police station, and the police actually try to arrest Peter. He then escapes, and while he escapes being arrested, this is where the information of him being a menace starts to pour out of J. Jonah Jameson through the media. This is where it really starts to get edgy. Peter starts to become a full-on vigilante, beating up anyone he deems a criminal, but also two police officers when he sees them committing police brutality, which, again, is a very timely topic in the early 90s, just as much as it is now, as well as a little subtle racism to drop in. Black kids think he's black, white kids white, Hispanic, etc. Italians say he's Italian, gays think he's gay. We also get the saving MJ scene when Spider-Man threatens murder, which is a very Spider-Man thing to do. The scene is very similar to the one in the original Spider-Man movie, except this one he goes a little far, saying, and I quote, "If you worthless chunks of vomit show your faces around here again, I'll decorate my Christmas tree with your intestines." Yeah, got it, Wolverine. So police don't like him, bad guys don't like him, and still nobody likes Peter Parker. So Peter begins to feel like an outcast, and Electro tries to use this to take him under his wing. This is also where we learn Sandman's backstory, where that he was fixing a pipe, and he was a maintenance man working at a science facility. It goes wrong, and he ends up getting blown into Sandman. Very similar to Spider-Man 3. This is where we see Electro make his sales pitch to Peter. Peter says no, and then they try to kill him. Peter escapes out a window, and the bad guys are even more pissed off than before. And that's when Strand actually starts paying off the media and donating to the police in their efforts to get Spider-Man. And this actually reminded me of Daredevil Born Again, but just on a much smaller scale in the way the Kingpin completely manipulates Matt Murdock's life and gets him essentially broke and homeless. He's also got guys to dress up as fake Spider-Man and rob jewelry stores, similar to what Ra's al Ghul did in Arrow Season 3. Then he ends up with the flu and growing up on someone's fire escape just in time for a little bit more subtle racism. He then goes on to do more Spidey and continually just makes things worse despite his best efforts. Insert Trump joke here. And this is where we go into Peter teetering on the line between good and evil. And it reads, Peter will have a crisis of faith, where the burden of the world's ills becomes so overwhelming he feels paralyzed. His new power is partially about the power he sees and the responsibility not to turn his head away. He can go into the shadows, look in the windows, watch us all from above, and he will see the human nature for what it is. He will enter the moral twilight zone where victims and the crimes are not so clear-cut, where it is hard for a well-meaning crusader to jump in and say or help when victims must be saved from themselves, or from a society which grinds them down, and how one man, one boy can really make a difference. The tide of injustice and pain is too overwhelming, like an avalanche thundering down on him until he starts to think there are no good people to save, only varying degrees of bad, that this whole city is a toilet of greed and dark passions. He busts some thieves to find out that they were just a bunch of kids like himself. One of the kids runs, trying to escape, and slips off the fire escape. Peter tries to catch him, but he can't. This kid hits the street and dies. Just kids, needing some money in a tough world, just like him. The line between good and evil is getting blurred. This is where we really see his morals start to get pulled. Aunt May can't make the house payments on her Social Security check. Now with medical bills piling up, Peter's going to need a job. Let's see. There's Pizza Hut, of a car wash, or there's always the $20,000 in 20s and 50s sitting on the coffee table of a drug dealer's house he just dropped in on. There won't be any objection for the drug dealers, who are all webbed up and waiting for the cops, who will take a credit for the bust. And then there's some money. Go on, take it. Aunt May needs that operation. Her Medicare won't cover it. Why should she suffer in pain? Maybe die. There's some money. Nobody would know. Spider-Man can move like a ghost, and Peter would have an extra little cash. Stop having to ride a moped or take the bus. He could buy a car and could take a girl on a real date. That would show those soft buttheads with the dentists and the lawyers for dads. The smirking laughter of the Mindys and the Mandys and the Sandys would finally stop ringing in his ears. He's hovering on the brink of going over the line and becoming a criminal himself. He sees this opportunity right in front of him. It would be so easy. Spider-Man, I figured being your friendly neighborhood Spider-Man would get easier as I went along. Well, I'm waiting. Cut to Spider-Man, his hand reaching slowly for the stack of bills. He looks into the eyes of the drug dealer. What the hell are you looking at? He leaps out the window with the money. So he takes the money and eventually gives it away like he's supposed to, because he's Spider-Man. He used all his pent-up angst to seduce Mary Jane and take her to the Brooklyn Bridge for some questionably consensual sex between high school kids, which again is probably legal because 90s, and we'll definitely talk about that more. Sandman sees Spidey and MJ together, deducts that they're together, and of course, like any good bad guy plot, kidnaps MJ to get to Peter, which kicks off the final act of the movie. He's set up so the police think that he's kidnapped MJ. He goes to Strand's house to find a videotape, because 90s, of Electro at the top of the World Trade Center holding MJ, threatening, come save her or I'll kill her. Again, because typical bad guy plot, he totally kicks the window of the World Trade Center in, which is totally uncomfortable if you think about it. Electro does his best Darth Vader impression, saying, Spidey, join me in the dark side and we can rule the city, shoves $250 million in his face. Spidey declines and Electro starts torturing Mary Jane. There's a great 90s reference where Electro shocks her and she starts doing the Watusi. He fully electrocutes her and Peter thinks she's dead, and we get the most not Spider-Man line in the movie. I'll kill you, motherfucker. You hear me? You're dead, you sick bastard. That's Spider-Man, remember? Electro shocks her and she wakes up and Peter goes ballistic, scoops up MJ, and jumps out of the World Trade Center. Again, uncomfortable. The bad guys jump after her and we get the final battle, and here's how it reads. So they have the big final battle outside the World Trade Center. Electro accidentally shoots Sandman and kills Sandman because sand and electricity became glass. He dies, and Peter goes, bummer. MJ tells Peter that she loves him, which he replies, cool. He ends up throwing Strand off a building, accidentally webbing him, but then his body slams into something, just like Gwen Stacy's does in the comic books and The Amazing Spider-Man 2. And that's how the movie wraps up. He dies. They go back to school. Peter tells MJ that he's Spider-Man, and they have the whole scene of Flash trying to punch Peter and only hurting himself. Peter says some cool one-liners, and him and MJ walk off into the sunset. So, I know that took a while, and I'm really hoping you guys are still there mentally. But, Greenblatt, let's start with you. What do you think, bud? What do you think of the screenplay? What do you think this movie could have been? And overall, what do you think?
I'll be honest, I didn't really enjoy it. Yeah. I mean, like, there's only really one part I liked about it, and that was just the Spider-Man voiceovers. That's
Okay.
really, I'll be honest, that's really the only thing I actually enjoyed about it. I mean,
No,
the
I
final
get that.
fight, like, it's just, I don't know, it I don't know, it just doesn't seem like the essence of what Spider-Man is.
And I completely agree with that. It was darker. It was definitely darker, and I think that had a lot to do with the fact that it's 1993, and if you look at comic books in the early 90s, that was when it was really starting to get dark, because the early 90s was when comic books could really start to push the limit of what they can get away with. You see, things like Maximum Carnage came out of that era, the Apocalypse stories. Like, it got dark. And so I can see that they did want to transition that to comic book movies. And yes, it did seem a little bit dark for a Spider-Man movie, but I also kind of like that. Matt, what do you think?
I liked the story as a movie, especially because, a James Cameron movie isn't going to be bad unless it's Avatar. Personal opinion.
Okay, well, I'll let that go for now.
Anyway, so it's going to be a good movie. Would it have been as fondly looked back on as the Tobey Maguire movies, the Sam Raimi movies? I don't think so. I think this is being written in like 1990. Like,
yes.
This is pre-Titanic. This is a while ago.
Yes.
When we saw movies that were comic book movies in the 90s,
they sucked.
They weren't doing great. They were Blade. They made a Fantastic Four in 94 that literally never saw the light of day because it was so goddamn awful. You can find that on YouTube.
I have.
So as much as I think it would have been interesting to see this get made, and Leonardo DiCaprio as Spider-Man is something I definitely would have loved to see. I think if he was Spider-Man, he could have been up there in the argument of who is the best Spider-Man, because he's got that skinny boy kind of, like, if he's not wearing the suit, he looks a little bit dorky. He's obviously still objectively handsome, but not menacing.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I think he would have been able to be sarcastic, likable. He just has that personality. He would have been a great Peter Parker. He would have been a great Spider-Man. So I think that would have been a movie that either would have been absolutely loved or would have probably grown into being a cult favorite, maybe.
That's what I was thinking. I could see it being a cult favorite movie. It reminded me a little bit of Tim Burton's Batman Returns. Looking at it, not the original Batman, because the original Batman, I think, had a little bit more camp to it, where I think Batman Returns took itself more seriously, which almost to a fault. I love Batman Returns, but it did take itself a little bit too seriously. And that's what I kind of thought of when I was reading this, is I got a Batman Returns vibe. I got a very... From a cinematic perspective, I got a very black and white color tone looking at it. Because if you think of Batman Returns, the sets are all snow-covered. And it's a very, very black and white movie. And I don't mean shot in black and white, but in terms of color tones, it's a very black and white movie. And I got that here too. And I agree. I think it would have been more of a cult classic. And I know when we talk about doing the fan cast of the whole MCU, I don't think it would have spawned a full Marvel Cinematic Universe. I don't think it had that power. But Sean, I want to ask you, do you think there would have been sequels?
I think there very well could have been sequels. Exactly what they would have I mean, obviously, they only made the script for this movie, so I don't know what would have come. But I could definitely see it being sequels as long as it made money and the critics liked and all that. But I think overall, I think the whole script was interesting. It definitely wasn't like the normal Spider-Man you're used to, but
No, not at
it
all.
would have been interesting to see, and it would have been interesting to see where they took it from there. Who they eventually had the Green Goblin, Hobgoblin, all those kind of
Sandman,
villains.
Doc Ock. They had Sandman, Doc Ock,
Seriously, it would have been
Vulture,
interesting if they just
Kraven.
kept going and see where they went. Yeah,
What other thoughts did you have on it?
yeah, Kraven would have been a good one.
So the way I thought about it, and this would obviously be different for different people. Me, I remember being a kid and latching on to the Sam Raimi films.
Yep.
Because while they were good movies, there was enough there for it to go for a target audience of a child. I remember seeing that in theaters. I was like 5, maybe even younger.
Yeah.
Probably younger. So
You were 97 or 98?
97.
5.
Yeah. So I was 5 years old. And I was able to latch on to this as a kid. Even though Green Goblin scared the living hell out of me, I thought it was a great movie, and I loved to watch them. When I think about this movie, this is almost a movie that – no, this is a movie that, maybe you're like 12 and you find a cassette and it's this movie, and you finally say, oh, let me check this out. And you look at it and you watch it, and it doesn't resonate with you the same way it would have. I don't know. Again, this is a movie I think that would have aged better than it would have been when it came out, but not for the best reasons.
So yes and no. First of all, I think, and I don't know if this is what you were hinting at in a way. I think Sean mentioned it. If this movie was made, it would have made money. It definitely would have made money. You put James Cameron, Leonardo DiCaprio, and Leonardo DiCaprio is not a huge star at this point, but if you put James Cameron
he was on the rise,
and Spider-Man together and release it immediately after the Tim Burton Batman movie and Tim Burton Batman Returns movie, I think you have good luck with it. If you wait and do it at once Joel Schumacher gets the rights to Batman, I think you're going to have an issue. and I firmly believe that, because I think Spider-Man's obviously a much campier character than Batman. And as I've already said, the first two Batman movies were really well done. The last two weren't, but the first two Batman movies were really, really well done. And much like you were saying, those weren't really kids' movies either.
No, they weren't.
Yeah, as much
really.
as I hate to admit this, looking back now, being an adult and understanding movies and what's a good movie and what's a bad movie just by naked eye. When I was a kid, I remember latching on to Batman Forever and Batman and Robin more than I did Batman and Batman Returns.
Yep.
Partially
Forever
because the Joker scared the shit out of me as a little boy. And the Penguin creeped me out. Not as much as the Joker, but still creeped me out. But it was that fun campiness of Batman Returns and Batman Forever and Batman and Robin that I think brought me in as a kid. So I definitely 110% agree with your point that this would have been harder for young children to latch onto the Spider-Man character through this film.
Yeah.
It would have been, because think about it, it would have been tough for adults to say, to bring their 5-year-old to this. I'll kill you, motherfucker. I swear, you sick bastard. That's not something I want my 5-year-old to hear.
No way that makes the final cut, by the way.
No way in hell. There's reason this movie didn't get made, and there's a lot of reasons, actually. But in the end of the day, I feel like there's definitely Lee would have stepped in and stopped it.
Yeah,
Probably.
he wouldn't want that. I think
Wasn't even their production
more
company, I don't think.
Pervy Spider-Man scenes wouldn't have done it, wouldn't have gotten in. A lot of this movie would definitely have been different if it got to production.
Yes, and I definitely I do agree with that, because and Greenblatt pointed this out. I think it was the first thing he said was that this isn't really Spider-Man. It reminds me of, and not that a ton of people watch our videos, but if anybody did watch this video, I'll get roasted for this, because you guys know I'm not the biggest fan of Henry Cavill as Superman. Now, I'm actually excited because they are making another Henry Cavill Superman movie, and I think it has potential.
That hasn't been confirmed yet.
It's been kind of confirmed. It's
I
been
think they said they
confirmed
wanted-
that Warner. Okay,
They said
it's
that
confirmed that
wanna
Warner
bring him
Brothers
back.
working on it.
Yeah.
It's confirmed that Warner Brothers is working on it, and they scrapped the Supergirl idea. So I like Henry Cavill as Superman, but I don't love Henry Cavill's portrayal of Superman, just because.
Well, that's also the writing, though. I mean, he was written horribly. Henry Cavill is an absolutely incredible actor. Like, he is amazing in almost everything else that he is in.
And I'm not arguing. I'm not trying to argue that Henry Cavill isn't a good actor. I'm not trying to argue that Henry Cavill doesn't play a good Superman. I'm trying to argue that the Superman we saw in Man of Steel, Batman vs. Superman, and Justice League was too hardcore, too serious, too mopey, and too stern to be Superman. And that's why I've pointed out to you guys 100 times why I'm so excited that my favorite iteration of Superman, which is the Tyler Hoechlin Superman that I know you guys don't love, but I do personally, is getting his own show this fall. Or asterisk was supposed to get his own show this fall.
Yeah,
Corona might have pushed everything off. But to each his own, and getting back on topic. I'm excited for it. But getting back on topic, you're right. It doesn't feel like Peter Parker. Okay, no, that didn't come out right. It feels like Peter Parker in the Peter Parker scenes. It doesn't feel like Spider-Man.
Yeah.
It's almost
like what happened.
It's almost
with
like
the
he
Sam
puts
Raimi
on the
movies.
mask and becomes a completely different person.
Pretty much.
Yes.
Like, a lot of the stuff that they pull out would be something I would almost consider throwing into a symbiote storyline.
Yes.
Yeah.
Because
You know?
no, that makes perfect sense. That makes perfect sense because in my first read of this, I did think, and I haven't mentioned this yet because I was kind of saving it, but this is the perfect time. I did think a lot about Spider-Man 3 and how this is the most we've seen Peter tempted to the dark side until Spider-Man 3. And I know until Spider-Man 3, but I mean, compared to Spider-Man 3, Spider-Man 3 was the only other one that did it. But as Matt pointed out, that was because of the symbiote, and the symbiote was warping Peter's mind. We just see Peter Parker being angsty and venomous, as a pun, without venom.
I wanted to say, add on to what you're saying. I also don't think this movie would have worked because there's also a big thing I don't think you guys have talked about.
Yep.
Merchandising.
Yeah.
Merchandising is a huge part of these these modern movies. That's how they get a ton of their money. That was one of the only reasons why because Disney, with Disney and Sony, they merchandising was one of the biggest parts of that deal to bring Spider-Man back. Merchandising is a huge part. I don't think you would have been able to get much merchandise out of this movie.
Oh, I disagree.
Some, but
entirely disagree.
I mean, some, but I don't know.
Star
just
Wars
with
was
how
built
the
on a
movie is.
pile of toys.
And
Yeah.
okay, can I go into toy nerd mode for a second?
Sure.
Do it.
Because I know my shit when it comes to this. So the early 90s was right as Toy Biz action figure revolution was really starting to take off. So I disagree. Plus you look at the merchandising and the merchandising records for Batman 89 and Batman Returns, that was pretty insane. So that on that one I do have to disagree. I think they could merchandise the shit out of this.
No, I mean, if they gave it a PG, well, then again, there wasn't really PG-13, hard PG-13s in the 90s, wasn't there?
Not
It was
really.
the PG-13,
because I mean,
Yeah, this would have been PG-13.
yeah.
See, the problem is it reads like an R-rated movie. Yeah, Batman 89 is PG-13.
It does.
yeah.
It reads like an R-rated movie, and as Matt already pointed out, they definitely would have softened it. You're not going to have Peter Parker screaming the words, "I'll kill you, motherfucker," in a Spider-Man movie. It just doesn't.
Also,
You
probably
can't
not
make-
the torture scene either.
Yeah.
To me, especially in the 90s, you can't make Spider-Man any more intense or more mature than they made, I would say, the original X-Men trilogy, which even that pushed a line a lot. You know, I mean, to the point where Wolverine was flipping people off with his middle claw.
Yeah, but that, yes and no. Okay, yes and no. Because yes, I agree that that's the line they would try to push. The X-Men line. That's where you theoretically want to be.
Yeah.
No, the only reason I'm saying no is that it's not, the X-Men are, I think, more serious characters than Spider-Man. So in the sense that they would be pushing that line, yes, I wouldn't want to see a Spider-Man movie with the same atmosphere that the X-Men have. Which I know you weren't suggesting.
I just probably would
wanted
have
to
gotten
clarify.
that.
What was that?
No, yeah, and that was my point. Like, that was my point. They shouldn't go that far. So I feel like they might have actually gone that far, and that would have been an issue.
Yes.
But you look at the X-Men movies, and they did well for kids. You know, I was Wolverine for Halloween one year. Like, so maybe it does work.